Hey there, Dango Stu here. Today's video is about the budget for the trawler, a little bit of footage from our trip to Chesapeake Bay, and is proudly sponsored by MarineEngine.com. A lot of people have been asking about how much it's cost to do the trawler restoration, and I think it's a really important part of the whole project to explain. So I've decided now's the time, given I'm in New York and a long way from the boat to do any actual work on it, I thought now's the good time to sort of talk about it. What I'll do first though is I'll just show you a few minutes of footage from our trip down to Chesapeake Bay. When we went down there, we stayed at Salt Ponds Marina with Jean, who's the owner there, and had a few days, had a good look around, survived Hurricane Dorian, and then finally got out on the water. When we first arrived in Hampton, Hurricane Dorian was sort of going north up the coast. We were fortunately spared the worst of it, but it was still a bit rough to go out boating. So instead we went out to some boat sheds. They were really cool buildings and had plenty of cool boats inside as well. It was really nice just looking around. It was a chance to sort of get out of the wind and the rain and see, you know, lots of great boats, particularly some American boats that I had never seen before. So that was, you know, actually really nice. One of the boats also had a parallel twin pair of Detroit diesels, which was something I'd never actually seen before, where you can run off one motor, the other motor, or both. They both feed into the same gearbox, and you can put, you know, one engine in neutral and, you know, use it independently, or, you know, have them both for a bit of extra power. So that was really nice to see that set up. To complete the Detroit Nirvana, it also had a Detroit diesel driven generator, which was pretty cool. So 3 Detroits in one room, my kind of boat. The boatyard also had this really cool old slipway, these amazing kind of simple but effective wooden cradles, and then this big winch that drove it all. It was nice seeing that. It was just a nice bit of old school engineering that is still in use today.
They don't make stuff like this no more.
Another thing I learned about was the intracoastal waterway that goes from Boston to the southern tip of Florida without going offshore. So I thought that was really cool. Great way to go boating. Anyway, next morning, another marina tenant called Stuart, great name, said he'd take us out on his steel sailing yacht. I think about 53 foot. So huge thanks to Stuart for taking us out. It was just an amazing day. You know, the day before was the hurricane flying past, and today it was just amazing, this day anyway. So we were down out at the sort of the mouth of Chesapeake Bay, and eventually we first started, we, you know, motored out, put the sails up, and then we started heading over to this really cool little lighthouse that had been sold to a private person for about $27,000, I think, with the kind of responsibility to look after it, but also full use of it. I thought that was pretty cool. It's the sort of thing I'd do, you know, but I really liked that. I'd love to live on something like that. It was very cool. There's no point cruising around a bay if you're not going to troll a fishing line, so that's what we did as well. Have you got anything yet?
Not yet.
Bit slow. Quite day today.
We're hungry.
Yeah, we are. Moving in the galley.
You use those at home a lot?
Which ones?
This little planer, number one
I
planer.
actually didn't have a good look at it before you got it in.
It pulls it down to a certain depth.
Yep.
And then as you apply more weight, then it trips and then it pulls up.
Ah, right, okay. Ah, and then it starts bringing it to the surface.
To the surface, yeah.
Ah, clever.
Yeah, most of my fishing I've done freshwater, and I'm just learning all the
saltwater stuff, yeah.
Whole different ball game. Learned that I know nothing.
Probably still know more than me.
We kept sailing towards the mouth of the bay so we can go and have a quick bridge where we saw these really cool Army hovercraft. They were amazingly quick for their size. They're, you know, huge and just quite a sight to behold. Anyway, then we lifted the anchor. Stuart got a chance to show me his nice, fancy new stainless anchor. It was very nice and quite the bargain, he tells me, which is great.
And where we normally anchor is about 2 o'clock on the other side of, say, the third one.
Yep.
It's a fishing pier here.
Be nice. Oh yeah, yeah.
Because the current comes through. Real roaring current, sometimes like 4, 5, 6 knots. I've had it where we were having 18 knots of wind blowing the back door of the boat.
Really?
Because the current had me spun
Right around against it, yeah.
To protect people from this current, they've sunk these old military ferro cement boats to form a kind of a break wall, essentially. So it makes this really nice sheltered harbour, and it's quite cool looking with these old boats in their various states of decay as well. It's quite a nice place to cruise through, and definitely be a nice place to anchor and, spend some quiet time for sure. There's signs saying, you can't go within 50 metres of the boats or whatever, but that'd be a fun, sort of structures to dive around, I reckon. Anyway, all good things must come to an end, so eventually we headed back to Salt Ponds and the protection of the marina. It's actually a really interesting waterway. You come in through this 90-degree turn, so you're really protected from all the rough weather there.
I'm in New York at the moment, in some sort of park attached to apartments, so I guess I'll just sit here till someone kicks me out and watch the squirrels. I guess the best way to sum up the budget is that there's no such thing as a cheap boat. You either buy an expensive boat or you buy a cheap boat and spend quite a bit of money on it. Now, I guess when I say that, I am talking about a larger boat. You can definitely grab yourself, a little runabout, find an old outboard that's not running, fix it up yourself, and actually be on the water fishing, scooting around for not a lot of money. You really can. The trouble is, as boats get bigger, there's just so many systems on them. Sorry, I'm distracted by my squirrel. What are you doing? They're new to me. I guess that's something I sort of now realise. There's no doubt I could have done some things cheaper. If you get a boat maybe that was in a little bit better condition, had been used more regularly, then you could probably get on the water and just fix a few things on a as needs basis, as opposed to doing a kind of a restoration, which is pretty much what I'm doing at the moment. But I'd like to sort of share with you what I've sort of roughly spent so far, just so you get an idea what this kind of restoration would cost you, so you can choose whether to go a full restoration or find a boat maybe twice as expensive, but one that had been used regularly and was still in pretty good working order. The best way to determine that really is obviously talk to the owner and do a proper inspection, pull the boat out. At the time, I was thinking I would do it relatively cheaply, so I was thinking, look, if I spend $1,000 pulling it out of the water and I don't like the boat, then it's $1,000 wasted. But given how much I actually have spent, that $1,000 seems inconsequential now, so it probably is worth doing. Might seem obvious to people who have bought big boats before, but in my mind at the time, it seemed a disproportionate expense to the cost of the boat. I guess in my mind I figured, I pull it out, I find whatever I find, and I probably just fix it anyway, so what's the point? It's kind of what I was thinking at the time. I guess the best place to start is hard stand fees. It's worth saying right at the front, all these dollars are Australian dollars, so, convert to your local currency. But all up, lifting the boat out of the water, if we ignore the sort of little Fenwick's disaster at the beginning, which cost me about $1,000, which wasn't too bad. But all up, to pull the boat out of the water, store it for the 8 months on the hard stand and put it back in the water was 10 grand. So straight away, there's the cost of the boat doubled, just by having a place to do it. If you look at someone like Doug, who's using his front garden, straight away, huge money saved. And even if you look at something like Brewpeg, where you're living aboard, then that may offset rent or something. So there's definitely ways to make that part of it a lot cheaper. I didn't really have a lot of choices, so I was really thankful for Rob to get me out of trouble, but it did cost. There's also a lot of setup in the terms of the tools you need. I'm not 100% sure whether you can count that in the budget of the boat, because you get to keep the tools, you can sell them later, whatever, but there's definitely a lot of tools I bought along the way. Even things like making the stands, each of those acroprops was $100 each. You then have to go and get more steel to make up the heads, weld them on, whatever. So that's, by the time the boat's just sitting there on the hard stand. Then I guess I look back to some of the other early expenses. Sandblasting the hull was about $2,500, and then you've got all your paints and anti-fouls. So even if you just got the boat out, went, right, I'm going to sandblast the hull, it's in pretty good nick, paint back in, you're probably looking another $4 grand to do that. I think anodes were about $500, so they're not cheap either. So anodes, paint, back in, you could say $1,500 before you've even, done anything else. I need a bit of work with the rudder post and the prop shaft and a new stern gland, sort of gland follower. I think they were about $3,000 because they're all stainless steel. So that was, another few grand flying out the door pretty quickly. And they were pretty essential in my case. If the engine was in working condition, I was kind of hoping just to give it a bit of a service and plop it back in. That would have been cheap. But I think all up, this engine's probably going to cost me about another $10,000. You could definitely do a bit of a cheap restoration if it's not in bad condition, re-sleeve it, or if it's not sleeved, just do a little bit of a dingle ball hone, get it running again. So that's going to vary a lot. In hindsight, I think I would have paid more attention to the engine. It started and ran quite nicely, which is a good sort of, testament to the strength of these Detroits. They could be in quite bad shape and still run. But I maybe, particularly with the Detroit where it's nice and easy, I would have at least popped the rocker cover off in hindsight as well. Whether I still bought it, I don't know, but it certainly would have given me some bargaining points, and that's just as valid. Then speaking of the engine, there's the gearbox. I ended up having it rebuilt. It was functioning, so I probably could have avoided it, but the engine's out, once again, no better time to do it. And the gearbox rebuild was about $3,000 in its own right as well. Unless I've missed something off the top of my head, you start getting into the smaller but not insignificant things now. Actually, not even necessarily smaller. So I'm putting the Raymarine multifunction display in with that side scan sonar. So, the sky's the limit when it comes to electronics, but I think those units were about $3 or $4,000. I think really worth putting in, really it's replacing the depth sounder, the separate GPS, all that kind of stuff, and upgrading the sonar, which is going to be great for the underwater search stuff. So I think that was really worth doing now as well. Once again, it's a good point. I guess worth mentioning as well is what do I need to do now and what could I do later? That's kind of a thing, everyone's going to decide for themselves. I had the boat out of the water, as you know, obviously, so it was well worth putting at least the Raymarine transducers in now because, I'll install the actual multifunction display later, but it's great having those transducers in now. I could perhaps have just bought the transducers while I was out, saved up, bought the actual multifunction display later. That's an option as well. Then there's other electrical stuff, while we're talking electrics. New batteries, 6 solar cells, there's, the red arc units, switches, VSRs, all this kind of stuff, good cable, and it all adds up. Everyone says boat stands for bring out another 1,000. I'm like, yeah, I've heard that before, mate. But it does, there's no doubting it. And you just have to decide what's essential, what's not. I could have put my gate valves back in, used the old hose. That was probably, or the old piping, the steel galvanized piping. That was probably about $1,000 worth of skin fittings, but I think upgrading to ball valves and then going to the flexible hose is going to make the reinstall better and easier. But even that flexible hose, I think it's about $50 a metre. It's really high quality, which is great, but quality comes at a price. After that kind of comes the death by 1,000 cuts, every flap disc welding rod, new bilge pumps, that kind of stuff. They range from $20 to $500, and it just seems to be an endless list. What I'll do is I'll put a link for the Patreons too. I think you guys kind of, more than anyone, sort of deserve to see the full PDF of all the expenses because, you guys have contributed a lot to this and really made it possible. Without you guys, it just couldn't have happened. So I'll definitely post a link for you guys as well with the full details just in case I've forgotten anything. But don't underestimate how much the incidentals, those stainless bolts, the grinding discs, whatever, add up. You just seem to be running to the hardware store almost every day. Another expense which you may or may not have was the mooring, the swing mooring. So I think that was about $1,500 to have a mooring laid for the boat, so a brand new mooring. At least I can, trust that it's good and strong. But I didn't have a mooring to put the boat on, so that was another expense as well. The total all up, I would say, was 10 to buy the boat and at least another 50. I've got to be honest, that's probably what it's cost, if not maybe even a little bit more. And the reality is I really couldn't afford that. So the Patreon, supporters really helped with that. But what I ended up doing is having to have shares in the boat. There was absolutely no other way I could have afforded to do this. So originally my dad, who I'm on holidays here with, said, I've never owned a boat, which he hasn't. We weren't really a boating family. said, you know, do you want to go halves in it? I'll you know, go 50-50 and we'll get it running and you could teach me how to drive it and we'll go out in the boat. And I said, you know, great, it's, you know, saves me. I'd already sold the motorbike to help pay for it. Viewers, whether you're a patron or not, definitely helped save the Land Rover, which, you know, at one stage really genuinely was looking like it just had to go. So at that point, you know, it really kind of saved the project, to be honest with you. Then another mate of mine said he was interested in going halves. I said, oh, well, actually, I've already sold half to Dad. And so he went thirds. So technically now I own a third of the boat. I've got 2 partners in the boat, a good friend and my dad. So, you know, we're pretty closely aligned on what we want to do, how we're going to use the boat, which is good. Finding good partners is really important. But it is a really great way to keep the costs down. Well, actually, no, it doesn't keep the costs down. It keeps your personal costs down. So I figure, you know, boat now has 3 Ts. It's like bring out another 333. And that really is something worth considering. Boats are very pricey and generally underutilized. So if you can find a good way to share a boat with someone, it's, you know, it can really ease the financial burden. I know if that hadn't happened, I would have had to cut enormous corners and do literally a third of what I've done to this boat. So it's really, really helped the project along. And I think if you've got some good partners that you'll have a good relationship with, you can trust, it's really, really worth, you know, considering doing something like that. All right, I better get back to the hotel now. I put a post out today, which is probably now 4 days ago by the time you see this or whatever. So we're going to meet some viewers today at the hotel tonight. So I better get running, get ready. But when we get back, lots more to do with the boat. So really it's a case of just saving. I don't have any money, you know, set aside for this. So it's really just a case of each month getting some money in, looking at what's the most important thing and pushing on, which is definitely what we'll be doing when I get back. Oh, speaking of when I get back, a lot of people commented going, oh, what are you doing putting polyurethane sealant in the deck? You know, that's bad. I'm going, oh, why is it bad, you know? Pete and I had 30 minutes to try and reduce the amount of rain that goes into the lazarette while I'm away, and when I get back I've actually got full sheets of steel to replace the deck, so it's not going to make doing that any harder, and it's better than having not done it. So I don't really understand the problem with that, but anyway, each to their own. All right, well, I better get on. Take care, and I'm actually going to visit 3 other YouTube channels, hopefully, while I'm in the US, so there'll be videos on those coming. If not, definitely 2, but hopefully 3, fingers crossed. And I'll have those videos out for you soon. All right, take care. See ya.